What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today I am really excited to welcome our guest, David Gibson. So David is an engineer, a producer, and the founder of Globe Institute of Recording and Production, and of course the author of the phenomenal book, The Art of Mixing, which changed my life a bit, I have to say. So it's great to have you on this episode, David. How are you going?
Great. Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Incredible to have you. When I was putting this out on our social medias to get some questions and stuff, there are some amazing producers that I really look up to that were like, whoa, you're talking to David Gibson. I've had that book for years. So that was really cool. I sent you a bit of an emotional email when I kind of finished the book, because it just honestly just had such a big impact on my mixes, and just the way things were explained, I just hadn't really had it explained to me in such a clear way that made sense. So it was very exciting for me. So I don't know what your reaction was reading that.
Right. It was really great. Always makes me feel good.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you went like, wow, bit of a weirdo over there.
Not at all.
All right, cool. So you've been in the industry for a while and been involved in just so many different things, from being in the studio and educating people and writing some incredible books which have really had an impact on the industry. So can you tell me a little bit about your journey of where everything started for you? I'd love to hear.
Well, I played clarinet in high school and then took up bass clarinet. I then got into audio recording in school, and I got a degree in broadcasting and took all the audio recording classes at San Francisco State University. And then my friend called up from Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm originally from, and said he had just bought a 24-track recording studio. So I went back and started running that recording studio, still quite green. And before long, James Brown's band booked the studio. So I got to meet James. He gave me a hug and said, "Bless you, child." So I've been blessed by the Godfather of Soul.
Wow.
Quite a few major groups in Atlanta. And then I moved back to California and started my own studio and school there and started doing classes. And I worked with a lot of the Doobie Brothers. And then it was 1990 that I actually moved to San Francisco and opened up the recording school, where we ended up having like a couple hundred students a semester. We had like 7 studios and 3 buildings, and it got really huge. And then somebody stole a bunch of money, and then that's when I kind of shifted over to doing more sound healing. Although I kept, we still teach audio recording online and at the Institute now. And it's really interesting because what has happened is, as everybody does, you start seeing this magic coming across when you're doing a recording session from different musicians, right? Mm-hmm. And even the way the song comes together. And sometimes, it's like you'll get goosebumps. Sometimes the room turns purple, right? And it's like, oh my God. And I thought, how can I reproduce that magic at will?
Yeah.
I mean, that it's kind of indescribable, right? And that's how I got into the sound healing and sound therapy. Now that has changed things dramatically. So now I'm looking at how sound and music in detail affects you physically, mentally, as far as brainwave entrainment, emotionally, and even spiritually. So now things have gone to a whole nother level, not to mention using binaural beats to entrain the brain into different brainwave states, right? So it's just an incredibly fun journey, right? To go from it used to be I would have the coolest recording school in the world. Now it's really how many people can we help?
Yeah.
Because we're using sound for different diseases and different emotional issues now.
Wow.
I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge variety of things. Doesn't sound like you'd ever be bored. Cool. So we will get into our topic today, which of course is mixing. And I'm sure there are, things that we could talk about for days, but we will try and keep it as concise as we can to kind of get across a lot of the main things in one episode that we can. So the first thing that we usually do is get our guests to define the topic in one sentence. So can you give me a one-sentence description of what mixing is?
Oh boy, it's a big question. Really, really, it's taking the four. I in my book I define it as taking the four tools of volume, panning, EQ, and effects, which effects includes a lot of stuff, right? And balancing them out in an overall mix. So the relationships of those four parameters help bring out the magic in the music. Right?
Yeah.
Now you're starting with just making it appropriate for the style of music. Right? Because normally everybody wants it, not everybody, but most people want it to sound like their style of music. So that's the first stage. But then, really finding the magic and not highlighting anything that's not magical, maybe creating magic with the mix if there's no magic going on. But then tuning in to whatever gives you goosebumps in the music and totally highlighting it. Not highlighting it too much because the mix will be, you can't turn something up too much for a style of music, but highlighting it just enough so it's more focused. And the magic could be like goosebumps. It could be dynamics. It could be, visuals of flying pink elephants that you get. It could be, God coming in. I mean, it could be whatever. And so that's the trick. What is cool? Because it's really all about highlighting and enhancing what's cool in the music.
Awesome. I love that. And you get quite a few different explanations for what mixing is, but I think that's really the essence, isn't it? Just what is it that's amazing about this song and to really make everyone hear that. So, I hear quite a bit from people saying, their song's okay, but with the right mix, it'll be awesome. But I think you kind of clearly in your book, before even getting to the mixing stage, you talk about what elements are happening in the track that you need to be really confident with before getting into the mix. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
It really is the production part. And I talk about it briefly in the art of mixing, but I go into detail in the art of producing. Right? It's really about critiquing all the musical components, the concept of the song, the overall energy of the song, right? The hooks, which are the things that are memorable. You can have like really hooks that are just memorable because they're just stupid, right? You can't get them out of your head. And then there's hooks that are like, oh my God, life changing, right? And that's why you remember them. There's also the melody, harmony, rhythm, instrumentation, song structure, the order of this and length of the sections of the song, the density of the mix, which is how many instruments and what frequency range. There's the actual mix itself. There's that can even affect the mix, but there's all these different the performance and so all of those, if you don't get it right, as we used to say before I got into sound healing, you can polish a turd, but it's still a turd, right? Yeah. And there's only so much you can do with the mix. Yeah. The music and the recording is still going to be there. Now you can hide some bad parts, right? But if there's no magic and no good energy happening in the music, you got to go back to the music, of course. So the production is huge. Now, I know some songs, and I even play them in my classes that are really interesting. The song sucks, but the production was so good that you don't notice how bad the song is, right? Because it's really cool production as far as what instruments and dynamics and cool sounds and different changes in the mix. So there's some cool things you can do with mixes.
Mhm.
I mean, the extreme example is dance music, right? I mean, that's like the extreme example of cool mixing is doing things with dance music that can totally make the song. Whereas, other music, it's really the song that counts. It's not the mix. And there's a full perspective of songs where you don't want the mix to actually be visible at all, right? You want it to be invisible because it's the music that counts. Whereas there's other music like dance music where all of a sudden now the mix can actually be a musical component. And now you can do some really cool, trippy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, you got to get the musical production part down.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think people need to kind of be aware of all those things as they're kind of thinking about the mix as well. So that's great. So you briefly touched on your kind of visual representation. That is a big highlight in the Art of Mixing book. And you mentioned, the 4 elements or dimensions. Do you want to talk to me about those or what those dimensions are a little bit more?
Yeah, what we're talking about is the world of imaging, which is a figment of your imagination. It's where we imagine the sounds between the speakers. The reality is the sound is coming out in sound waves throughout the whole room, and it's going through every molecule in the room, and it's everywhere. That's the reality. But our imagination imagines sounds to be between the speakers. And what I discovered is there's limits as to how far that space where we imagine the sounds between the speakers goes. It's just a little bit to the left and right of the speakers, a little bit to the top of the speakers, all the way down to the floor, a little bit in front of the speakers. If you turn the volume up, it's going to get closer. Some people say 2 feet or even like right before your nose. I normally only see it like 6 inches on normal speakers as when you turn it up, or how far it goes back when you turn the volume down. Distant thunder can be miles behind the speakers, but normally I'd see an image only like a few inches behind the speakers when it's turned way down. So now what I'm doing is mapping out this space between the speakers where the actual sounds happen. But the whole deal is how much space does a sound take up? If it's a limited space, if you got a bunch of sounds, right, or they're really big, you're going to get masking really quickly where sounds start hiding each other, right? And so bass instruments take up way more space in the world of imaging. If you have 2 bass guitars in a mix, it's going to be Mud City. If you got 10 bells, though, there's you can hear them all perfectly fine, even if they're all playing at the same time. So low frequencies take up more space. Fattening, where you spread a short delay with less than 30 milliseconds left and right between the speakers, that will take up more space. Also, reverb takes up more space because that's like hundreds and hundreds of spheres, hundreds and hundreds of sound. So now it all becomes crowd control, right? I mean, are you going to have sounds separate or overlapping? And it's interesting. People talk about, how do I create more space? Have less instruments, or don't put as much fattening or reverb or delays, which create more sounds in the mix. Right? I mean, that's the deal if you want more space. Or you could even say use higher frequency instruments. Then you'll have plenty of room.
Yeah.
So it's really all about, visually what I'm doing. And it's been totally based on showing masking visually, because that's a major problem. And masking happens at different frequency ranges, right? You, as an engineer, you might know, low frequencies aren't going to mask a high frequency instrument. If you have more than too many instruments in the mid range, they can hide each other. You can pan them, but it's only going to do so much, especially if you have too many. So that's really the main course. So then from there, the whole visual system becomes, what are the dynamics that you can create with the mix as opposed to the actual production? And it's interesting when I get into a more esoteric aspect, you can say, okay, a balanced mix where you got a guitar on the left, keyboard on the right, like a hi-hat on the left, and then a shaker on the right, at each frequency range, you're balanced. that's creating more of a peaceful feeling, right? Which would be more appropriate for a peaceful song. Whereas if you have, the vocals on the left and the rest of the band on the right, that's a little, creates a little tension. That's a little odd, which could be perfect for a song about psychotic behavior or she left me in left field again, right?
Yeah.
So now you're creating different geometric structures that create different feelings that are appropriate for different styles of music.
Yeah.
So now you're looking at mixing structures from a whole different perspective as to what they can do. More than anything, is it beautiful or unique and intense? That's the difference. And with volume, panning, EQ, and effects, you can create those dynamics. You can have a balanced mix, which is very sweet. With panning, you can have even volumes that make it nicer so nothing jumps out and shocks you. You can have EQ that's natural. You can have effects that are not too weird, right? Now you've got a really beautiful mix. It could be perfect for a love song. But if you're going off the deep end, let's go. Let's play. I mean, goodness gracious, you could have an unbalanced, lopsided mix. You could have EQ that's really trippy, not so much that it makes you crazy, right? But just trippy. You can have like effects going in and out, the parameters of the effects changing. Oh my God. You could totally have a wild and crazy mix that is perfect for something that's wild and crazy.
Yeah. Cool. So another thing that you mention in the book is, there are so many different tools available to a mixing engineer, but would you say that they can be put into a few different categories?
Yeah, you can basically categorize all equipment by what it does as far as volume, panning, or frequency, right? Or a combination of those, because those are the three basic parameters of sound that there are. So everything has to do one or more of those things. So you got your volume faders or volume compressors or volume functions, noise gates or volume function. EQ is volume of frequency, right? And then there's a lot of different tools that do volume of frequency. Then frequency would be like a harmonizer or pitch shifter, because that's actually changing the frequency, not the volume of the frequency. And the delays are totally time-based effects, where they're using time. I mean, they've got volume in it and other things, but they're all about time, same as reverb. And so, so you can categorize all the equipment in those different categories. So then when you start looking at the visuals, then you can map those parameters into volume, panning, and frequency, which is front and back, left and right, and up and down, right? So now you can actually control all the parameters of every effect visually, right? And another thing that happens, a lot of people may not know, these visuals are flashing. So it's like bump, bump, right? So you're seeing the images flashing in real time. So it's a total to watch. I can't wait till we can actually do it in 3D in a club where the DJ can take a sound and throw it out into the club. And when it gets close to anybody, they'll get control of it. And then they can throw it around the room in real time.
That's crazy. Awesome. So then you can kind of use these 4 classes of tools, you'd say, to control those 4 aspects that you were saying. So if you feel like there is something is less present and you want to hear it a bit kind of upfront within your image, you might go for one of the volume tools, such as compression or something like that.
Well, you can look at every tool as to how it can make something more upfront. Number one thing is volume, right? You turn it up. But compression will stabilize it so it seems more present and louder, because it's not like, you're not losing the soft parts of it, because it's more stable. You can also use EQ and boost the EQ in the mid-range to make something more present, or in the highs, right? You can look at volume, panning. If you pan something to the center, it's going to be more present than if you put it to the side, unless there's actually nothing else on the sides, right? And so you can look at all the different parameters, volume, panning, EQ, and effect, as to what they'll do. Fattening which is a delay less than 30 milliseconds, where you don't hear two sounds, bop, bop, you hear whoomph, right? That will make things way more present as well, right? So in those three parameters of volume, panning, EQ, and effects, volumes front to back, pannings left and right, frequencies up and down, the effects are kind of a combination of all of them, depending on which effect you're going to use. So you like reverb's going to create, more of a bops throughout the whole space because it's like a room between the speakers. So all of them have their different aspects as far as the different effects.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, one thing that people seem to say when they think about mixing is they really want, step-by-step options of what to do when they get to a mix. But from what you kind of say is that it's such a different process depending on the style you're working with, and what you might do for one genre of music might be completely different to what you would do for another genre.
Well, the process is similar, though the same.
Yeah.
There is a process that you can go through that's the same for any style of music.
Okay.
And this is the way I teach it. The first step is to EQ everything individually, one instrument at a time, right? Bring up that one sound, EQ it, get it sounding natural, or whatever you think it should sound like for that song, if you already know the song.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you solo at that stage or no?
Don't even solo them. Just have all faders down.
Okay.
All faders down. So it's better than soloing. So because you haven't built the mix yet at all. All faders down. Bring up the first sound, EQ it. Bring it back down. Bring up the next sound, EQ it.
Cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't even bring all of everything up yet.
Right.
Now, second step is bringing everything up, and you want to bring things up one at a time, and always listen for what you've got going, that it's sounding perfect before you bring in the next sound. Right. So I often start with the kick drum. Some people do this, the order a little differently, but I like to start with a kick drum or a bass instrument and set it, and then set the volume in the room for where you're going to have it. Right. You don't want to be messing with that. Okay. Then you bring up the snare in relation to that. Then you bring up the rest of the drums one by one in relation to that. Now you got your whole drum kit. Now make sure those relation of all those volumes is the way you want. When you bring them up, go ahead and pan them. When you bring them up, go ahead and put the effects on them.
Really?
Because it's going to change it. Yeah. Put it on as you bring it up, right? You're going to refine it later. But if you're going to bring it up, the volume's going to be based on what you're doing. So go ahead and put the reverb on it as you bring it up. So you got your drums up. Now listen to the drums and sneak in the bass. All you're doing, it's kind of like a multi-track mind, where you're tuning into all the drums at once and bringing in the bass relative to all of them. So now you got the drums perfect. If you bring up the bass and the mix doesn't sound good, there's something about the bass that's a problem, right? Instead of bringing all the sounds up at once, bring them up one by one, and always make sure what you have sounds great. So if anything ever goes awry, you know right where the problem is.
Yeah.
Because you brought it's the last thing you did. Right. Now, after you get everything up, now you're going to go through and refine all the volume relative, now that everything's up, the EQ. You're going to, because now maybe something's not bright enough relative to each other, the effects and the panning. So, and you go through it over and over, volume, panning, EQ, and effect, volume, panning, EQ, and effect for every single sound, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
And now you've got the whole mix up. Then the last step is to start automating, right? Are you going to automate any volumes going up and down, any panning, right? Then that's the last step, because you don't want to do that before until you get your mix balanced out.
Yeah.
And then after you automate any effects or panning or volumes or whatever you're going to do, then it's a matter of putting some mastering compression and mastering limiting on your master fader. You want to go ahead and do this if you're doing it just for the song, even if you're going to have someone else do it later, just do it now for yourself, so it will sound more even and right. You can take it off later if you're going to send it to a professional mastering engineer. And then you're going to, go ahead and bounce it to disc, set the beginning and end times, set your fade. And if you're going to fade out at the end and bounce it to disc. So that's the basic process that is the same regardless of the style of music.
Amazing. Oh, that was so useful, David. Yeah, thank you. Because even that, I think people sometimes maybe have a workflow, but can't really define it very well. So I think that a lot of people will get lots from that. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
With the rhythm, build the rhythm foundation first, and put all the lead and vocals and everything, and all the percussion and stuff, or frills, and fill. Put those up last. So get your rhythm section built first.
Yeah, awesome. And you touched on it a little bit, but creating dynamics is something that a lot of people seem to struggle with, and they feel like their mix just sounds a bit flat. And do you have any advice for them on that?
Oh boy, that's a big question, because most dynamics are created in the music and the production.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's only so much dynamics you can create with the mix.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking dynamics, when you say dynamics, I use dynamics in my book to mean anything that builds an energy or anything that breaks down an energy. That's what I define as dynamics. And there's a lot of things. Actually, I've got my list up here. I mean, you can actually have even harmonics, which is a warm sound versus an edgy sound that will create dynamic. Odd. I mean, edgy sounds create more activation. It's all about calming or activation. I mean, pure sounds are more activating than complex harmonic structures. Loud sounds are more activating. Less instruments or more instruments are more activating. High frequencies are more activating. Faster tempos are more activating. Staccato and short notes versus legato notes are more activating. If you're using binaural beats, alpha and beta and gamma rhythms are more activating than subdelta, delta, or theta. Complex melodies are more activating than simple melodies. I mean, it just goes on as far as all the different effects and such. And so the whole deal becomes using things that are calming or activating and then slowly changing. If you just change those 10 different things that I just covered, from calming to activating, there's no two ways about the dynamics being massive. Right? I mean, now you're changing 10 things. Not to mention, you could add more intense effects in the mix. You could actually maybe bump up the volume of an intense sound. You could maybe start doing some wacky panning, left and right. Or throw in some really trippy flanging or preverb, backwards reverb. I mean, goodness gracious. All of those are quite activating. So you build up with not only the dynamics of the music, which is the main thing, but also the dynamics of the mix as well. So, so it's interesting. A lot of people, when they make music, they just float. And a lot of songs don't go up or down very much. If you're creating dynamics, create dynamics, get louder. Get more intense with the music. Use different chords that create more dynamic. Have one cool thing in your arrangement is you could actually take a chord and add a chord above it, an octave above it. So now you got 2 octaves, right? And this is easy to do with MIDI, of course. Or take that same MIDI file, that MIDI track, and add multiple instruments to it. If you got like 5 instruments playing the same MIDI track, now you've got more dynamics, right? Or what I like to do is slowly walk the chord progression up. So do an inverted chord progression. So you got a C, E, and a G. Put the C on top for the next measure or round. Right? And then take the bottom note and put it on top. So you keep moving up higher and higher. So now you're creating a dynamic that's going higher and higher in frequency, because you're going up the scale on the notes, and then break it back down. There's so many different ways you can create dynamic musically and with the equipment.
Amazing. No, thank you for that. I'm sure some people will find a lot of use for a few of the things that you mentioned, and some of them you can implement fairly quickly in your production.
Just energetically get more intense. Just right? Just get more intense. I mean, that's like,
yeah.
goodness gracious, you want dynamics, just get more intense and then break it down. What I do, and there's other people that are doing this a lot more these days as well, is fade out slowly on the home note of the key of the song if you want to leave people in a still place.
Okay.
And
cool.
even if the song sucks, often people will go, whoa.
No, awesome. I will keep that in mind. Cool. So, we've covered kind of a lot of different things about mixing, and like we said at the start, I'm sure we could go on for a long time. So we have some questions for you now from our audience. So the first one was by Ray Kalia from Melbourne. So she asked, do you have any special tricks in creating more space in your mix?
Well, that's what I mentioned before. Less instruments.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of depends what you mean by space. Space can mean more space between the instruments or more spatialness, which means like more reverb and effects that create what we think of as a spatial effect, right? So I'm assuming she's talking about more space between the sounds.
Yeah.
If you simply have less instruments, you got more space because the space that you're mixing in is limited. So now you got more. I mean, if you got 3 violins in a mix, you got way more space than if you got a 100-piece orchestra. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of space between the sound. So that's obvious. Don't use as many effects. Use shorter notes, more staccato notes. Yeah. It's like Steely Dan. Their mixes are totally spacious because they have very short notes. Right. And so there's not a lot going on at any single moment.
Yeah. I love that. Awesome. And so we have another question by Ryan KP. So Ryan asked, what are your methods for stereo imaging?
Oh, God. Well, it depends on the instrument, right? I mean, certain instruments, there's strict rules. You put the vocal in the middle, right? You put bass guitar in the middle, unless it's maybe a high-end bass, you can put it off the side. The kick drums goes in the middle. I mean, there's certain traditions we've developed for those main instruments, and that's where they're going to go. Every instrument has its own possibilities. There's so much I get into in this. The big thing is, okay, are you going to place the instruments based on where they are on stage or in the studio? It's the first consideration. Normally we don't, right? If it's going to be a video of a concert, you do place instruments where they are in the video, right? But normally we don't care about where they are in the studio or on stage. Yeah. The next consideration about a stereo placement is balanced or lopsided. Are you going to make the imaging so you got something on the left and something on the right so it's balanced, something in the high frequencies like a hi-hat to a shaker, they're balanced as well for a song that's about love, or unbalanced? That's your next consideration. Balanced or unbalanced? Are you creating tension by creating unbalance, or are you creating harmony, depending on the song? But then the other is, and the biggest one is, where is there space for it?
Yeah. The
most obvious. I was at like a Audio Engineering Society convention. I had a booth there years ago, and this little 9-year-old comes up and he goes, well, because I had the touch-sensitive screen where you could move the bubbles around and control the mix. He says, well, shouldn't you put each one in a different place so they're separate? I'm like, yeah. Totally. I mean, obviously. Now, remember, you're not going to get masking from low frequencies to high frequencies. Yeah. So you just want to place things wherever there's room for it. Yeah. Right? Where there's something else not there. Yeah. Those are the main considerations as far as panning, other than the traditions for specific instruments.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, so just looking at the obvious things, which we can sometimes overcomplicate our lives. So cool. And the last question we had was from Darbush from the US. So she asked, how long did it take you to get comfortable with mixing where you weren't questioning every knob twist?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I remember it was about 5 years before I would do a mix and I would go, cool. I might
Yeah.
still want to change a few things here and there,
Yeah.
but it was happening.
Yeah.
Right. And I was happy with it. And I didn't want to change anything else.
Mhm.
And, so it took quite a few years before really got to the point where it was incredible. And then it was then there was the day, even later, maybe a few years after that, when instead of people questioning my mixing, they would come in and they would say, "You the man."
That's awesome.
And then I thought, oh my God, I finally made it, right? Because now they really are respecting what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, here's the deal. This is the main way you get to this position. It's really about learning the dynamics as to what you can do in a mix and then studying the radio and CDs all the time, right? That's the whole deal. Noticing what people are doing and analyzing it like crazy.
Yeah.
And there's three questions you always ask. First of all, what are they doing with volume, panning, EQ, and effects?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it loud? Is it soft? Is it louder than normal? Is it panned weird? Is it, with EQ, is it good? Is it normal or is it weird? Check it out. And then the second question you always ask is, why did they do that? Why did they put it there? And it's just a game. You don't really know, right? But what it does is it starts pinning down the reasons why people place things in the mix the way they do. And then the third question, which is huge, do you like it there?
Yeah.
And the first answer is I don't know, it's like a little more left or right, a little louder, so who the hell cares, right? But after a while, for different songs and different styles of music, you get very detailed ideas as to what you like as far as volume, panning, EQ, and effect.
Yeah.
So then if someone in the room says, can you please make the mix suck by turning my instrument up too much? You can go, no, this is why I'm doing it. And I really feel it should be this way. Because you've been studying and you really know, you've developed your own values over time. Then people go, okay,
right,
go for it, man. Right? But you can still negotiate with people, and sometimes people, when I was working with James Brown's band, right? I remember it was they were doing a vocal and it was a rap song before rap even existed, right? The drummer was doing the session and he came in early on the verse. There was a lead section before the verse, a little, pre-verse, a little tag before the verse started, and he came in early, and then he started when the verse started. And he came in. I said, "Let me erase that false start." And he goes, "I knew it was wrong." He says, "No, don't erase it." I said, "But it's wrong, right?" He said, "Don't erase it." I said, "But it's like an engineering error." He says, "Don't erase it." So I thought it was right, but he was right. Now that I listen to it, you hear this little false start, and it brings you in to listen closer. What was that? And now the verse, and it's really cool.
Oh,
right?
Okay, yeah.
So you can have strong opinions, but always listen to what other people have because there can be a genius in odd clothing.
Yeah. Cool. No, I think that's important to mention because sometimes people can, get in this I know everything bubble, which can be frustrating to work with. So good for everyone to consider. So thank you so much for your time, David. It's been lovely, and I'm sure so many people will get lots from this episode. So do you have much else planned for the rest of your day?
For my day, we'll have class tonight. We're going through the harmonic structure of sound and how to use that for healing.
Yeah.
Healing different issues. Yeah, there's a lot going. We do have our Sound Healing Conference online coming up on November 11th.
Yeah.
You can get in touch with me at david@soundhealingcenter.com, or you could even call 415-777-2486, or you can email me and we can do a Skype call as well, or Zoom. The website for the school, if you go to soundhealingcenter.com, you'll see all the stuff we're doing. Or you can just go to globerecording.com just for the audio part. You'll see all the classes there.
Okay, lovely. Well, you've given us all the ways to contact you. So if anyone wants to chat to David, then you know how to get in touch with him, which is great. All right, David. Well, yeah, it's been lovely, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was fun.